Late autumn 1702, a quiet night. A man sits in a dim room, a sheet of paper spread before him. He picks up his brush, puts it down, picks it up again, puts it down again. He is writing to his mother. This is not an ordinary letter home. The man writing it knows he will likely not survive the winter. But he does not write grand words. He does not mention swords or vengeance. Instead, he writes about small domestic things, reminding his mother to look after her health. His tone gentle and unremarkable, like a son about to leave on a long journey. It is now held in the Akko City Museum of History. The man who wrote it was called Otaka Gengo, one of the 47 Rōnin. A few months later, he was dead. But before we get to his death, we need to tell someone else's story first. A story that took place in a corridor of Edo Castle and lasted only a few seconds. The 14th day of the third month, Genroku 14, April 21st, 1701, by the Western calendar. Edo Castle, the Honmaru Palace, the Matsu no Oroka, the Great Pine Corridor, connecting the Shiroshoin to the Ohiroma. Giant pine trees painted across the walls on either side. On most days, this hallway was so quiet you could hear the rustle of silk sleeves. On this day, a Bakufu official named Kajikawa Yosobe was standing in the corridor, speaking with Kira Yoshinaka about rescheduling a gift-giving ceremony. Kira held the rank of Kokea, a hereditary master of ceremonies responsible for coaching daimyo in court etiquette. He had been doing the job for roughly 40 years. Then, without warning, a figure came charging out of the corridor's depth. According to Kajikawa's own written account, the only surviving eyewitness testimony, Asano Takumi no Kami Naganori, lord of the Akko domain, appeared from nowhere, screaming, and attacked Kira from behind. The first strike of his short sword grazed Kira's back. Kira spun around. The second slash caught him across the face, and he fell to the ground. Kajikawa immediately seized Asano. Other samurai in the corridor rushed to help and dragged the struggling daimyo into an adjacent room. The whole thing was over in seconds. Drawing a blade inside Edo Castle was absolutely forbidden. No exceptions, no matter who you were. To understand why this was so grave, you need some context. By the Genroku era, the Tokugawa shogunate had maintained peace for nearly a century. Swords had become more ornamental than functional, and what truly mattered was protocol, propriety, and decorum. Drawing a weapon inside the shogun's castle was the equivalent of launching an armed assault at the seat of supreme authority during peacetime. The severity was absolute. In 1701, the shogunate had assigned 2 daimyo to receive envoys sent by Emperor Higashiyama, Asano Naganori, and Date Muratoyo, lord of the Iyo Yoshida domain. Both were placed under Kira Yoshinaka's instruction to learn the required court etiquette. Date Muratoyo's mission went smoothly. He completed his duties without incident. A traditional account suggests that Date's retainers may have quietly presented generous gifts to Kira to ensure cooperation. However, this claim has no contemporary documentary support. In fact, a similar story, retainers secretly gifting Kira without their lord's knowledge, first appeared in the 1748 Chushingura puppet play, where it was attributed to an entirely different daimyo, Kame Korichika, who had served in a comparable role back in 1698. Over time, dramatists moved Kame's story to 1701 and eventually conflated it with Date's experience. In other words, Date's smooth completion of the mission is documented fact. The reason for it is not. And the narrative that Kira deliberately mistreated Asano because he failed to offer bribes is a literary invention, not a historical record. So why did Asano draw his blade? Nobody knows. This is the single greatest mystery of the past 3 centuries. After his arrest, Asano offered only one vague remark, something along the lines of, "There were certain matters in recent days." He refused to elaborate. Subsequent scholarship has proposed 3 hypotheses. Kira demanded a bribe and was refused. Kira personally insulted Asano, or Asano suffered some form of psychological breakdown. All 3 lack conclusive contemporary evidence. The only certainty is this: Asano attacked a 60-year-old shogunal official from behind, inside the innermost sanctum of the shogun's castle. Asano drew his blade in the morning. By the afternoon, the verdict was in. Shogun Tokugawa Tsunayoshi was furious. He gave Asano no opportunity to explain himself. That same day, the order came down. Asano Takumi no Kami Naganori was to perform seppuku immediately. The Akko domain, roughly 53,000 koku, was to be confiscated in its entirety. The Asano house was to be dissolved. As for Kira Yoshinaka, he was left with a scar across his face. No punishment. Even at the time, the speed of this decision was controversial. Some daimyo privately argued that the shogunate should have at least investigated Asano's motive. A feudal lord drawing steel in the castle surely had some reason, but Tsunayoshi was not interested in reasons. Asano was taken to the residence of Tamura Ukyo-dayu to carry out the sentence. Here is a detail that modern scholars have widely noted. Asano's seppuku was performed outdoors, in the garden, rather than inside a formal chamber. For a daimyo of a 53,000 koku domain, seppuku would customarily have taken place indoors, with screens, with witnesses, with the full ceremonial procedure befitting his rank. To be made to die in a courtyard was, by the standards of the day's rigid status hierarchy, a further stripping of his dignity as a lord. Many contemporary researchers interpret this as a deliberate act of additional humiliation by the shogunate, though some have pointed out that the haste of the judgment and the compressed timeline may have made proper indoor arrangements impractical. Either way, the detail would be cited repeatedly by Asano's former retainers in the years that followed. Asano Naganori was dead. He was 33 years old. From the moment the blade was drawn to the moment he died, less than half a day. The news took roughly 5 days to reach Akko. An entire domain had vanished overnight. More than 300 samurai had lost their lord, their stipends, and their identities in a single stroke. They were now Rōnin, masterless warriors, which in that rigidly stratified society meant they were virtually nothing. That was when one man stepped forward. Oishi Kuranosuke Yoshio, chief retainer of the Akko domain. He gathered the clan's principal vassals and laid the situation bare. Their lord was dead. The domain no longer existed, and they had 3 options: scatter and go their separate ways, die together in a mass act of martyrdom, or wait. Oishi chose the third. His first plan was not revenge. He petitioned the shogunate to restore the Asano name by allowing Asano's younger brother, Asano Daigaku, to succeed as head of the house. If successful, no one would have to remain a Ronin. The petition was denied. That was when Oishi turned the conversation in a different direction. From the summer through the autumn of 1701, Oishi convened a secret meeting in Kyoto. Only his most trusted former vassals attended. There was a single item on the agenda: kill Kira Yoshinaka. But this was not an impulsive decision. Oishi understood clearly that once Kira was dead, every one of them would die too. This was not a failure of planning. It was the plan itself. What they intended was to prove with their own deaths that their lord's death had been unjust. What happened next is probably the least heroic part of the entire story. Oishi began a long, grinding process of filtration. Of the 300-odd former retainers, a fair number initially declared their willingness to join. But as the months dragged on, 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, a year, and willing to die transformed from a spoken oath into a concrete date and operational plan, the number shrank dramatically. According to tradition, Oishi kept an internal assessment report grading each man's resolve and reliability. Whether this document truly existed and whether it was written in Oishi's hand remains a matter of scholarly debate, but the filtration process itself, from many to few, is well attested. In the end, only 47 remained. During those 2 years of waiting, Oishi did something that puzzled everyone. He moved to Kyoto and began frequenting the pleasure quarters, drinking, carousing, looking for all the world like a man who had given up entirely. The traditional explanation is that this was all an act. Oishi was deliberately performing dissolution, drowning in sake and women, to make Kira's intelligence network believe the Rōnin had abandoned any thought of revenge. It is a dramatic story, and it has been retold for 300 years. But, according to more recent scholarship, the reality may not have been so clean. Oishi had a reputation as a heavy drinker well before becoming a Ronin. His colleagues had once nicknamed him Daytime Lantern, meaning useless. During his time as chief retainer, he was noted as being not good with money and requiring assistance from senior vassals for financial matters. So his behavior in Kyoto, was it a meticulously crafted disguise or a degree of genuine self-indulgence or some murky combination of the two? No one can say for certain. The real Oishi was very likely more complicated, more gray, than the perfect actor of legend. There is another aspect of this story that rarely gets mentioned: money. 300 men had lost their employment, no stipends, no income. The Akko treasury had been emptied during the domain's handover. How did the 47 survive for 2 years? They needed food, shelter, and a long-term presence in Edo, one of the largest cities in the world at the time. Some accounts describe Rōnin assuming false identities as carpenters and merchants, infiltrating Edo to gather intelligence on Kira's residence. But the specific details of this espionage, whether they obtained floor plans of Kira's mansion, for example, largely come from later accounts and lack contemporary documentation. As for funding, one theory holds that Oishi drew on remnants of the Akko domain's finances, though the exact amount and channels remain unclear. Revenge was an extraordinarily expensive and extraordinarily boring affair. The 14th day of the 12th month, Genroku 15, January 30th, 1703, by the Western calendar. Heavy snow was falling over Edo. 47 men gathered quietly in the darkness. They wore crude, homemade armor, not because they could not afford better, but because purchasing armor would have raised suspicion. They carried swords and bows, along with 2 signaling instruments prepared in advance: a drum and a whistle. The drum meant begin the attack. The whistle meant Kira is dead. O-Ishi split the force into two groups. He would lead the front gate team. His son, O-Ishi Chikara, would lead the rear gate team. Before the attack, they did something remarkably unusual. They sent messengers to every neighboring house to explain, "We are former retainers of the Asano house of Ako. Tonight is an act of vengeance. We are not robbers. No one else will be harmed." One Rōnin even climbed to the rooftop and announced loudly to the surrounding neighborhood that this was a formal act of kabuki, a sanctioned vendetta. According to the records, the neighbors, none of whom particularly liked Kira, did nothing to intervene. The drums sounded. Kira's retainers jolted awake and scrambled to fight, but the 47 had come prepared, armed with bows, operating according to a coordinated plan. Attacked from both front and rear, Kira's household suffered 16 killed and 22 wounded. But Kira was nowhere to be found. The Ronin searched the entire mansion, rooms, closets, the women's quarters. Everywhere they found only weeping women and children, but no Kira. They began to despair. O-Ishi touched Kira's bedding. Still warm. Keep searching. At last, behind a large hanging scroll, they discovered a concealed entrance to a hidden courtyard. In the courtyard stood a small building used for storing charcoal and firewood. Two armed retainers hiding inside were subdued, and deep in the shed, they found a man. He lunged at them with a short blade, but was easily disarmed. He refused to identify himself. But the Rōnin studied his face closely, and there, on his forehead, was an old scar. 2 years earlier, in the Great Pine Corridor, a Sano short sword had left that mark on Kira's face. They blew the whistle. O-Ishi knelt. Addressing Kira with the courtesy due his high rank, he explained their purpose. "We are former retainers of Asano Takumi no Kami of Ako. We have come to avenge our lord. We respectfully ask that you end your own life, as a true samurai should." He produced a short blade, the same dagger Asano had used to commit seppuku. O-Ishi offered to serve as Kaishaku Nin, the second who delivers the final cut, to spare the dying man a prolonged death. But Kira crouched on the ground, trembling, unable to speak a single word. The Ronin pleaded with him again and again. Kira would not move. Finally, O-Ishi gave the order. They held Kira down, and with that same blade, cut off his head. The same knife that had scarred Kira's face in 1701. The same knife Asano had used to take his own life. The same knife that now took Kira's. As the first gray light of dawn crept in, the Ronin extinguished every lamp and hearth in the mansion to prevent a fire that might harm the neighbors, then formed into a column and marched out, carrying Kira's head. They walked roughly 10 kilometers across Edo, all the way to Sengaku-ji, the temple where Asano Naganori was buried. Along the way, it is said that passers-by stepped aside for them and offered them water and refreshment. They washed Kira's severed head and placed it, together with the dagger, before Asano's grave. Then they gave the temple abbot all the money they had left and asked him to see to their burials. Then they turned themselves in. Tokugawa Tsunayoshi faced an impossible choice. Legally, the 47 men were murderers. They had carried out a private vendetta, and the shogunate's edicts explicitly prohibited unauthorized acts of personal revenge. If they went unpunished, the authority of the law would become a joke. But by the moral code of the warrior class, these 47 men had done exactly what nearly any samurai would consider honorable. They avenged their lord and were prepared to die for it. If the shogunate executed them as common criminals, it would be declaring that loyalty held no value. Making matters worse, public opinion overwhelmingly favored the Rōnin. Petitions poured in. But the picture was not as one-sided as it might seem. The claim that almost everyone supported them deserves qualification, because at least two prominent thinkers of the day openly criticized the 47 Ronin. The first was Okyu Sorai, a Confucian scholar in the shogunate's employ. He took the legalist position. No matter how noble the motive, law is law. If every man were permitted to justify vigilante killing in the name of loyalty, social order would collapse. His words, transposed to the present day, sound like a judge's ruling. The second was Yamamoto Tsunetomo, author of the Hagakure, a man more samurai than the samurai. But his criticism ran at the exact opposite direction from Ogyu's. He believed the 47 Ronin had waited far too long. He posed a piercing hypothetical. What if, during those 2 years, Kira had died of illness? Then they would have lost their only chance at revenge forever. Even if they later claimed their dissolute behavior had been an act, that they had been on the verge of striking, who would have believed them? They would have been remembered for eternity as cowards and drunkards, bringing everlasting shame upon the Asano name. A true samurai, Yamamoto argued, should have attacked Kira immediately after the lord's death, even if outnumbered, even if certain to fail. What mattered was not the outcome, but the will. One said they should not have done it at all. The other said they did it too slowly. Asano's 47 former retainers were caught between the two. In the end, Tsunayoshi reached a compromise. The 47 Ronin would die by seppuku as samurai, not by execution as criminals. The verdict was itself a contradiction. It acknowledged their act as a crime while simultaneously honoring their dignity as warriors. It upheld the law while granting loyalty a dignified exit. On the 4th day of the 2nd month, Genroku 16, March 20th, 1703. 46 Ronin performed seppuku at the 4 separate daimyo residences where they had been held. The youngest, Oishi Chikara, had been just 15 on the night of the raid. He was 16 when he died. The 47th man, the Ashigaru Terasaka Kichiemon, was spared. Accounts differ as to why. Some say Oishi ordered him to carry news of their success. Others say his rank was too low to be included in the group's fate. He lived to be approximately 87. After the 46 were dead, they were interred at Sengaku-ji, beside Asano's grave. Then something interesting happened. Barely 2 weeks later, the first kabuki play based on the incident opened, and though it was quickly shut down by the authorities, similar productions followed in rapid succession. In 1748, the definitive theatrical version, Kana Dehon Chushin Gura, premiered. It transposed the story to the Nanboku Cho period to evade censorship and changed every name. From that point forward, the story was no longer history. It became Chushin Gura, a parable of absolute loyalty. In this version, Asano is a flawless lord, Kira is a pure villain, and Oishi is an impeccable hero. But the real Asano was a man of unknown motives and impulsive action. The real Kira was admired by his own vassals and known in the region near his country estates for funding salt production, expanding rice paddies, and contributing to public works. Hardly the monster of the stage.
The real Oishi was a middle-aged man with a drinking habit, walking an ambiguous line between performance and self-destruction. The real story is more complicated than the legend, and for that very reason, more powerful. Let us return to that autumn night in 1702. Otaka Gengo sits there, writing to his mother. He is one of the 47. He knows what he is about to do, and he knows what will happen after. But there is nothing heroic in his letter. According to the original, preserved in the Akko City Museum of History, he writes about ordinary concerns, reminding his mother to take care of herself, to mind the cold. His farewell poem speaks only of snow weighing down a pine branch. 3 centuries later, that letter is more persuasive than any drama ever staged, because it tells us that beneath all the grand narratives of loyalty, law, honor, and death, these 47 men were, first and foremost, 47 ordinary people. They had mothers. They had attachments. They had fear. They paused for 2 years. And then they chose.